Hi, welcome to the Private Doctor's Lounge, where with various medical experts across different fields, we'll dive into tips and tricks to optimise your health and well-being. I'm Dr. Suhail Hussain, a private home visiting GP to high net worth families. And today I'm joined by Dr. Raj Persaud, Consultant Psychiatrist and Psychologist, and we were looking at ways to manage stress. Hi Raj, thanks for joining me. So before we dive into today's topic, tell me about what prompted you to enter psychiatry and what led you to be here today.
Well, I think it's first of all important to discuss what a psychiatrist is and what the difference is between a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst, a psychologist. One of the problems with this area is it's very confusing with all the different terms. So I'm a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is someone who is medically qualified, and therefore, because I have a medical degree, I can prescribe medication. And also, under the law, I can fill out some paperwork with another doctor and a social worker and commit someone to hospital against their will. Only a psychiatrist and a GP and a social worker have the legal power in Britain under the Mental Health Act to actually commit someone against their will if they're very seriously unwell in a mental health sense to hospital. So a psychologist can't do that. I'm a very unusual psychiatrist in that I did a degree in psychology halfway through medical school. I was a bit of a swot at medical school, and so I am actually a qualified psychologist in a sense, and I'm a member of the British Psychological Society, and I have a degree in psychology, but I also have a medical degree and qualified in psychiatry. But interestingly, what that means is many patients come to me expecting a prescription, and I tend not to prescribe. I actually think there's something psychologically powerful about the fact that the patient knows I can prescribe, but that I choose not to. And it makes them go away and think hard, well, I was expecting a tablet. And one of the things I think we're going to be discussing is one of the big problems with mental health or psychiatry and psychology is people are looking for a magic bullet. They're looking for a shortcut, a simple answer that will take away the stress in their lives. And unfortunately, there is no magic bullet. What you have to do is do a bit of work, and that will tend to be the solution to your problems.
Absolutely, and I think the same with physical health, whether it's blood pressure, cholesterol, weight loss, all of these things, patients often feel that they want a magic pill, a silver bullet that will solve all their problems. They don't have to do any work. They don't have to exercise. They don't have to watch what they eat. They don't have to look at whether they smoke or drink, all of these things. They expect the doctor, the GP to prescribe something. And I think that attitude has pervaded society for far too long. So it's really interesting and I think enlightening that you have that attitude as well. And as you say, you're a psychologist as well as psychiatrist. So recently in the news, we've heard about psychoanalysts not being regulated. I'm sure you've heard the stories about that and the sort of problems that causes when they're dealing with vulnerable people. How would you say patients should approach that scenario where they're seeing someone they don't know whether they're qualified or even regulated?
Well, a psychoanalyst is a particular form of psychotherapy, and psychoanalysis began with the great and famous Sigmund Freud. And psychoanalysis is a particular approach. Psychoanalysis is about the idea, controversial idea, but an idea that's pervaded society, that we are driven largely by unconscious forces that are going on in our mind, but beneath conscious awareness. So, for example, why might someone keep returning to heroin? Why might someone be a heroin addict? And despite the fact it makes no rational sense to take heroin, what's going on? The psychoanalyst would say that at some unconscious level, maybe they have a desire to self-destruct, for example. And psychoanalysis is a very intensive form of psychotherapy. In the full hardcore version, as espoused by someone like Sigmund Freud, back around the turn of the century in 1900, that's when one of his most famous books, The Interpretation of Dreams, was published. You see a psychoanalyst, according to the treatment advocated by Sigmund Freud, once a day for 50 minutes, 5 days a week, for years. Some people have been in psychoanalysis for decades. I interviewed the famous film director Bertolucci Bertolucci once, and he had been in psychoanalysis for so long that several of his therapists had died from old age, and he was still in psychoanalysis. And that raises another really interesting thing. I see many people who've been in various forms of therapy for a long period of time, and I ask them, has it worked? And they give me a very strange look. And it really raises a question as to what people are going for when they go for therapy. Some people are actually going for almost a form of friendship. They're going for a form of long-term support. And that is fine, as long as you're clear that's what you're aiming to get. There's another kind of therapy, which is more the kind of therapy that I espouse or I practice, which is what we would say is more pragmatic and solution-oriented. So you go with a specific problem. I'm depressed because my girlfriend or boyfriend has left me and I can't get to work because I'm so depressed, and I will focus and help a patient overcome their depression and return to work. You can see straight away that's a very kind of like focused approach. There's some people who have everything going for them. They may be very wealthy. I work in private practice in Harley Street. I often see very wealthy people. I see people who are household names. I see some people who are some of the most attractive people on the planet. They're beautiful. They may be a beautiful Hollywood actress. She may be a multimillionaire. She'll be married to a drop-dead gorgeous actor. They may have lovely children, several homes all around the world. Yet she is still unhappy. Now, there's a sense in which that kind of problem doesn't look like the first kind of problem I discussed. Maybe that's a deeper problem to do with her personality, that she's unable to find happiness no matter what's working in her life. And that's the kind of problem that psychoanalysts would say is more suitable to psychoanalysis. So problems that emerge from your personality, not problems that emerge from circumstances.
And what about the model that Balint espoused, that the doctor as a drug? Is that something that you feel these sort of people are prone to gravitate towards?
Well, the doctor as a drug is a very interesting idea. One of the ideas there is the doctor as an authority figure. And I believe, and one of the reasons I'm keen to talk to people like you and educate people about psychotherapy and psychology and psychiatry, is people are too passive in therapy. When you go for therapy, when you go to a psychiatrist or your GP, you shouldn't be passive. You should question the therapist. For example, you asked me a little bit about my background. You should ask your therapist as a patient. Tell me a bit about why you chose this particular form of therapy. Tell me a bit about your training. Tell me a bit about what motivates you. These are important questions if you're going to evaluate your therapist and get a sense of whether you're with a good therapist or a one that's a good fit for you. Because the standard in therapy and psychotherapy and psychiatry is very variable. If you had a rumbling appendix right now and you had an appendicitis and we took you by ambulance to the local casualty department, the surgeon that operated on you anywhere in the United Kingdom would be performing a procedure that's done to a certain standard. And the standard wouldn't be low, even if the surgeon wasn't particularly good. He would hit a certain basic standard. You could be relatively confident you would emerge from the hospital with a procedure that had helped you. I'm afraid to tell you, and this is a controversial statement, it's a wild west out there in the world of therapy. The standard is very variable, and the vast majority of people, I'm going to say something very controversial, it's going to land me in trouble, the vast majority of people in this field are not very good at all. And one of the reasons they can get away with not being very good is most patients are not educated enough about psychology and psychiatry and psychotherapy to spot what is good therapy and what is bad therapy. And the other thing that's happening is people are pessimistic. There's a kind of therapeutic pessimism. People don't expect to get better from mental health problems. So when they don't get better, they just think that is all the field has to offer. So in my private practice in Harley Street, I see many patients who've been decades with a therapist that's been useless, in my opinion, and not got them anywhere. And they've come to see me, and I know I'm going to sound a bit arrogant, they've got better in a very short period of time. When that happens, I often ask the patient, why did you stick with the other treatment that went on for decades, not getting you anywhere? And people make a mistake. There are many reasons why that's happening. It's happening surprisingly commonly. But one reason is they think that just going for help, seeing a qualified therapist, means they're getting treatment. That doesn't mean that at all. Going back to your point about regulation, the area is very poorly regulated. The standard is very variable. So you could be seeing someone for a long period of time. It doesn't mean that you're getting any treatment at all, really, and it doesn't mean you're getting a good standard of treatment. So we want to educate people to be more critical of their therapists. Ask them questions. Ask them what's the goal. Ask them, how am I going to get better? Ask them what their track record is. Have you treated patients with this problem before? What is your success rate? Invigilate, interrogate the therapist. Don't be passive in the therapeutic process.
So would you say there's an onus on the psychiatrist or the psychologist to say, well, I think I can help you and I can achieve X, Y, and Z outcomes? Or is it fair, is it even honest for them to just continue decades and decades of treatment, charging people sometimes large amounts of money? How would you say that sits with their duty as a doctor to try and help treat the patient?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I do think, and again, I'm going to say something provocative and challenging, and I want to emphasize that many of the ideas I'm going to discuss with you today are not mainstream ideas. They're ideas that I certainly promulgate and advocate, but they're unusual ways of thinking about psychiatry and psychology. And the reason I advocate them is because I think the usual way of thinking about psychology and psychiatry doesn't work. So I want to emphasize that many of the things I'm going to discuss with you will be found very irritating by many people watching, particularly other psychiatrists and psychologists. And I apologize for the fact it's going to be irritating, but I also believe that we live in a world where people should have alternative ideas, alternative ways of looking at it. I'm advocating this, but if people aren't happy with this particular perspective, they can go and see another therapist or another psychiatrist. I haven't got a problem with that. And what's really interesting about the notion of alternative ways of thinking about the world, that is at the heart of mental health. If your boyfriend or girlfriend leaves you and you're feeling suicidally depressed, you're thinking about the world in a particular way. You're thinking that life has lost all meaning because this person that was very important to you is now out of your life. That's one way of thinking about the world. One of the things we know about resilient people who maintain their mental health, no matter what adversity they face, is that they're able to think about the world in alternative ways. Okay, maybe I'm feeling very miserable now, but is it not possible that I could survive without this boy or girl in my life? So you've got to be able to consider alternative ways of thinking. So I'm going to be advocating a particular way of thinking. It's going to annoy a lot of people. In the comments underneath this podcast, there'll be a lot of people that will be fulminating about what I'm saying. What there is the problem with their position is they believe there's only one way at looking at the world, which is their way. I'm advocating an alternative. There's many other alternative ways of looking at the world. People can try them out. I'm advocating a particular alternative, and I think that people might want to consider it. I have no problem if they want to try something else. But what I would say is the success rate in mainstream psychology and psychiatry is very low. If you look at the research studies for standard cognitive behavioral therapy, referred to as CBT or antidepressants, the success rate, generally speaking, is around a third. Only a third of patients seem to get better. A lot of those patients relapse. So I believe the field needs a revolution in terms of the way people think about mental health, and I'm advocating an alternative, and I believe it's possible to get a success rate that's much higher than just 33 and a third percent, or a third of people getting better.
And what I found with patients I've referred to, they do find you very forthright, and that elicits one of two responses. Either they say, this is fantastic, I've got someone who gives me some, not strict guidelines, but some protocols and procedures to follow, as you would, let's say, with a knee operation. And others have come back and they've been really offended, or they found your interaction confrontational, so to speak. And we've had conversations about people that you've seen for me. So yeah. I do think, and I agree 100% with you, that this field of psychiatry, psychology needs to be more strictly regulated, and some standards need to be adhered to and implemented and adhered to.
So I think that's a good point. Let me be clear. I'm absolutely aware, I have insight that my style can be very annoying. Okay, I get that. But I would, in my defense, say something, which is all patients know that I am trying to get them better, and I'm really very concerned to help them get better. At the heart of therapy is another key dilemma. It's at the heart of life. Do you tell people in any everyday conversation or in therapy what they want to hear, or do you tell them what they need to hear? What they need to hear is never going to be popular. It'll often be unpalatable. But actually, in the long run, it's better for people. In any everyday conversation you're having with someone, people are basically seeking a dynamic, a conversation, an everyday conversation, where they get back what they want to hear. They want their prejudices confirmed. A girl has lost a boyfriend. She wants her friends to say, of course he'll be back. Of course he'll miss you, etc., etc. So friends fall into line, and they tend to tell people what they want to hear. So one of the reasons why some of the patients, I'm sure you've sent me, have been a bit annoyed is I'm not telling them what they want to hear, I think. I'm telling them what they need to hear. Now, there's a really big school of kind of amateur therapy, and sometimes even professionals are doing it, who are doing this thing where they just tell people what they want to hear. It's very, very common, and you can make a lot of money doing that. Now, I have a word or a term for that. I call that empty reassurance. So a student is very nervous, they're coming up to an exam, they haven't done any revision, and they're very anxious, and they talk to their parents and their friends, and the friends and parents give them empty reassurance. They say, I'm sure it'll be fine. What they're doing there is trying to get the student to calm down. I agree it may not be particularly helpful to say to the student, you're almost certainly going to fail because you did no work. I get it, but that's not helpful at that moment. And I'm not necessarily saying that I would say that. But people are often telling and radiating the message in therapy about what they want to hear. Okay, they're actually telling you, don't tell me what I need to hear, tell me what I want to hear. Yeah. And very rapidly, I can discuss with a patient whether this kind of therapy is for them. So a lot of patients don't want to do the work. A lot of people in life don't want to do the work. We're going to use many tennis analogies. I play a lot of tennis. I'm a very competitive person on a tennis court. I'm doing the work to get better at tennis, to try and not lose. What I find intriguing is I play against people and they lose, and they lose, and they lose, and they lose, and they keep losing, and they repeat the error again and again and again, and they seem frustrated. And this is a metaphor for life. This is happening in life. Why don't people go and do the work and get some coaching, and therefore they'll have a better experience on a tennis court? So this kind of analogy for life is what we see happening in people's lives, which is things don't work out and they keep repeating errors rather than thinking that life is about getting the right training, the right help in order not to repeat the error or not to make errors. And it's entirely possible with training, with therapy, with the right approach to have a better life where you win on the tennis court and where you win at life.
So you've talked about seeing people, highly successful people, actors, celebrities, and so on. How would you say, or does stress impact high-performing individuals in a different manner? And how does one combat that, or how does one help that high-performing individual deal with stress?
Well, let's talk a bit about stress, because it's a very often used word, and a lot of people will be watching or listening to this podcast because they're under stress and they want some help. So the very first thing I'd have to say, and it's a sign as to whether you're dealing with a good therapist or a competent therapist or someone who's not very good, is if people start by asking you questions about what you mean by the words you use. So someone may come into the consultation and say, I'm feeling very stressed. You should ask, what do you mean by that? What are you getting at? And a good therapist asks a lot of questions before they move to the advice. So there's two basic ways of thinking about stress. People find themselves in a stressful situation. Their boss changes at work, the new boss is very bullying and difficult, and they find themselves upset. So they'll come in and say, I've got a very stressful boss, or I've got a very stressful marriage. What they're doing in a very interesting and psychological way is they're locating the problem out there in the world. It's the world that's making me stressed. And what they're saying in a coded way between the lines is, make the world different, take away the stressful boss, and I'll be okay. That is the inherent message practically every patient is coming with. The world is stressful, I'm stressed as a result, make the world a different place, and I'll be less stressed. Unfortunately, there's a big flaw with that, which is it's difficult to change the world. We can change the world, but we've got to do some work to do that. What people need to realize is the first thing they can do, and the most helpful thing, is change themselves. They can change the way they deal with the stressful boss. They can change the way they deal with the stressful circumstances, and then they won't be quite so stressed. So the problem with the word stress is it misses an important term, which is coping. What is the correct coping response when the world becomes a stressful place? And if we mount the correct coping response, then we won't be quite so stressed. So this very strong link in people's heads between a stressful situation out there in the world and us becoming stressed is a mistake. It's a basic mistake. And it's at the heart of all poor mental health. And what it's doing is it's ignoring this other key variable, which is how we cope with stress. So there's stress and then there's poor coping. The problem with that conversation so far is they've left out the crucial variable. Yes, you have a stressful boss at work, but you are mounting a poor coping response, and if you mounted a better coping response, then you won't be quite so stressed. So the reason why this is not popular, and already people will be irritated who are watching this, is it changes responsibility. It says you need to take responsibility for your mental health, and you can, and you need to do something about it. The lovely thing about saying it's the stressful boss that's stressing me out is you don't have to take responsibility. It's all the boss's fault, and everyone wants to blame the world for why they're upset. And there is a kernel of truth to why you're upset, and it is something to do with the fact that the world is a difficult place. But you can mount a better coping response and you will have better mental health.
Okay, so we've talked about individual stress. How does stress impact people in the family environment?
So this is a really interesting point, and again I'm going to say something very annoying and somewhat provocative. One of the really interesting things about mental health problems or psychological stress or difficulties in the mental health world is they often end up impacting people around the person suffering from the disorder much more sometimes than the person suffering from the disorder. So the people who end up suffering may be the family members of someone with clinical depression or anxiety, because they end up running around trying to cope with it and deal with it, often with very little support from the health service. So when you have a raging pneumonia yourself and you're coughing up blood and feeling very unwell, you're the one that's suffering when you go to the doctor and they prescribe an antibiotic. When you've got depression and as a result you don't go to work, your wife becomes very stressed, or your husband, if now the income's gone, or you're lying in bed all day, and people around you are very impacted. So mental health has a unique ability to cause stress in people around you, and they often end up suffering a lot more than the person at the centre. And I think that's the thing that people don't understand. Now, the next problem with stress within a family, because someone's got a mental health problem, is that within a family, people are torn. They want to be nice and warm and cuddly to the person with depression who's not getting out of bed all day, and they find it very difficult to be tough. And toughness is sometimes necessary. It's an essential part of what helps people get better. You don't want to be overly tough or nothing but tough, but there is a sense in which being a parent, for example, requires toughness. And therefore, the big problem we've got is that conflict occurs. Whenever you have a mental health problem, there's conflict. I understand you're not feeling well enough to go to work, but I honestly think that if you just went for an hour a day, it might be a lot better. And you're going to have an argument or a fight with the person with the mental health problem. And I think that within a family, people are very untrained or haven't been supported enough in understanding how to handle conflict. You can't escape conflict. It doesn't mean you're in a terrible family if there's all the conflict over the fact someone's not going to work, when maybe it would be better that they did. But it's important not to run away from the conflict.
So that's really interesting. So if I can expand on that, would you say it's better to have tough love and to challenge the person in a nice way? Or would you say it's better to take the, not mollycoddling, but the supportive and understanding role as a family member, wife, husband, whatever?
Well, it depends on the circumstance, but you can see immediately one of the problems with tough love. Tough love is an important concept to just explain a little bit more about, because it's bandied around a lot and people often get it wrong. So tough love is about an idea that although you may love someone and they may be part of your family, you may have to do something that seems a million miles away from what would normally be expected in a situation of stress. So let's take an example. You've got an alcoholic son. It could be a daughter, we'll just go with son. And this alcoholic son's been in their 20s, but they've been drinking for decades and not showing any signs of getting any better or making any attempt to get help. The police call you to say your son's been arrested for being drunk and disorderly in a public space and is now languishing in a cell. And the police say, can you come and pick him up and take him home? Tough love says, and people are going to find this extraordinary, don't go and pick him up. Okay, leave him to cool his heels there, and you say to the police, well, I'm a bit busy, and you turn up a day later. So he's experienced the consequence of his actions. Asian families in particular suffer from this problem, that everyone's meddling. So the grandparents, uncles and aunts start calling you up going, why are you not going and bailing your kid out of the cell and the police station? So you come under enormous pressure, particularly in Asian families, but in other situations, to not do tough love, when actually that is the correct thing to do. So you've got to withstand the kind of pressure around you.
So on the converse, on the flip side, would you say perhaps modern society has disintegrated and become so insular and modular that we've lost that supportive system. You talked about Asian families, and classically back in India or Pakistan, there used to be a large extended family, the parents, the grandparents, uncle, the auntie. And when a child was born, everyone would muck in and help and support and provide moral, physical, emotional help and support. So have we lost that perhaps in modern day life where there is no other input? So we're not talking about mollycoddling, we're talking about support and structure and advice from the grandmother who's seen it or who's got 10 grandchildren from all of her children. So have we lost that ethos of support and care?
Well, it's a very, very good question. It's undoubtedly the case. It's a very important question. I would say that a great family that is supportive and intelligent and caring is the best welfare, therapy, support system, occupational guidance system in terms of what career your kids should pick than anything else that's out there in the world. What we've done is we've professionalized. There's an army of social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists that now step in. We professionalize these issues that were dealt with within a family before. So a family is by far and away a more superior system than the professional systems, the care system, the social work system, because the family knows the individual much better and tends to care more for them. Where the family can fail, though, is it can be unintelligent about these things. It can give the wrong advice. I've seen many very wealthy Asian parents keep writing checks to give money to the wastrel children who've got a big heroin habit. They don't realize that in giving them the money to buy sports cars or whatever, you're also giving them money to fund the heroin habit. Okay? And what the wealthy Asian parents have to do is stop giving them money. And then they go, well, I'm being threatened by my kid that Russian gangsters will come around and break their knees if they don't pay up their debts. And I have to help support them understand how to deal with that kind of very stressful situation. But families can be toxic as well. So it's not just that families are good things or bad things. It depends on the quality of the family interaction. And you can have wise parents, but you can have foolish parents. So when you have foolish parents, families become positively dangerous, in my opinion.
So how does one nurture a supporting and positive frame of family?
Well, I think that this is very, very difficult, and families won't always get this right. And you often see a lot of dysfunctional families around. That's why there's this thing called family therapy. But I think that one of the key issues is the ability to think about what's in the interests of a particular family member beyond what's in your interest. So a classic situation you see in Asian family businesses is the patriarch or the matriarch at the head of the family, who is also the chief executive officer or the chairman of the board of a family business, wants the children to be in the family business because it's in the father's interest, who runs the company, or he thinks it's an interest, but he's putting what's the child's actual interest secondary to what's their own interest. So one of the problems with this very strong idea within the Asian community that the family is the be-all and end-all and we should worship at the altar of the family, it depends on whether the family is able to look after the different interests and the conflicting interests of people within a family. And I think that's a problem. And it takes a very educated parent to think independently. It takes a very educated person to think independently of what's in my interest, separate to what's in the interests of the person I'm dealing with.
So we've talked a lot about stress and difficult situations, and sometimes stress is actually beneficial if you need to escape from a dangerous situation or you need to deal with a confrontational issue at work or in your business. So we need to be firm and decisive in the way we act, and that will elicit a certain response. Cortisol and adrenaline will rise. But generally, I think we'd agree that stress is harmful and detrimental. So how can we live our life such that we manage stressful situations and deal with these encounters, which are bound to happen every day in our life? How can we manage that and try and have coping mechanisms to help us deal with these things?
Well, life is very difficult. Life represents problems. And I think one of the inherent questions, and I see a lot of wealthy people who have led gilded lives and fly by private jet, and yet, oddly enough, find it, maybe it's not so odd, difficult to deal with a stressful world because money can buy solutions to a lot of problems. Money doesn't insulate from every single difficulty. And the more that you have been mollycoddled by having a lot of money, and I see this a lot in my private practice, or you've been mollycoddled by the fact you're a very attractive, famous actress, and so men fall at your feet all the time and just do whatever you tell them to do, the more you are insulated from problems, the weaker you often become. I've seen people who are positively, in my opinion, disabled by the gilded life that they've led. So the first question is to think hard about what you think life is. Is life inherently difficult? Is life inherently problematic? And therefore we have to learn the skills of how to deal with difficulty and expect to deal with difficulty. So one of the most famous quotes in philosophy, and it's on more t-shirts than any other quote in philosophy, comes from the famous philosopher Nietzsche. And the quote goes something like this: "That which does not kill me makes me stronger." Yes, yes. Now, what people don't realize, although this is a very famous quote and they will have heard it before, is actually it may be a misquote, or it's a quote that misses out a sentence that came before that gets omitted. And the sentence that comes before is very, very important in understanding what Nietzsche's really trying to say. So the first sentence is actually something like, "In the war that is life, that which does not kill me makes me stronger." Okay? So that's a very important idea. If you wake up every morning prepared to wage war and see life as a war, then you're prepared. You're tooled up, you're armed, you voyage out into the world with a sense of, I'm going to fight the world and I'm going to overcome difficulty. If you take a view that life shouldn't have any difficulty, and when difficulty comes along you're somewhat surprised and a tad upset, then you approach it with a completely different attitude. Yeah. And I believe that one of the successes, one of the reasons why immigrants tend to be a bit more self-reliant, because they kind of expect life to be tough and hard. Yes. What we see is the people who cope best in life were the ones who were expecting it to be pretty terrible, okay? And they arrived expecting that, and they thought, let's do something about the fact it's terrible, let's fight, let's wage war, and they become tougher people as a result.
Thank you. So I think, in essence, what you're saying is, life is not a fairy tale. The prince and the princess met, got married, lived happily ever after. That is the beginning of life, I would say. And I think we're better off basing our philosophy on ancient wisdom, as you said, religion, classic religions like Judaism, Islam, all of these things teach us that life is a journey. It has ups and downs, there are vicissitudes that we go through, and no one is expecting it to be a bed of roses. We have to accept and understand that there will be adversity. And if we go into life with that attitude and perhaps have this, I have a spiritual belief that we are not here forever, we are here temporarily, and we have a life after this life. So I think having that overview of something else beyond our life on this earth, I think will equip one with the tools and the tips and the techniques to deal with all of the adversities that we encounter. Thank you so much, Raj, for coming and talking with me today. How are the ways that people can get hold of you to see you privately?
Well, they can Google me on the internet, and I have my own website, and they can contact my secretary, Sheila Banks. And I have my own podcast series, which is a free-to-download app. And there's a TED Talk I've done, which has had over 5 million views. So there are lots of resources on the internet. But certainly they can make contact with my secretary by Googling her name and my name, and my website will come up, and the contact details will be there.
And what we'll do is we'll add all of these links at the bottom of the show notes so people can access them if they wish to afterwards.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you found today's episode interesting and informative. If there are other topics you'd like me to discuss, please do let me know below, and I will endeavour to get guests to discuss those. If you're looking for a private home visiting GP, then reach out to me via my website or the contact details below. And remember guys, true wealth is health.